Hello, how do you do? Can you hear me okay? Hello? And we're on. Hello. Welcome to Architecture Day in PEI. Today we have a great presentation set up for you. This is part of World Architecture Week. It's been a long time in our planning. This marks the second time we've had a COVID set up for Architecture Week. So we're all online again, and that's fine. We'll have people here representing some government people, one government person on current net zero strategies in the province. And then we have a couple of architects from Halifax that will be discussing net zero ideas inside of that province in their current work with net zero studies. Net zero is a highly understood topic. It's also a highly not well understood topic in the architecture and the general building world. It's a current topic in terms of sustainability, and it's something that our profession and our public are looking for to advance sustainable design for a much better and sustainable future that's going to be more carbon free. We right now will start to look at how the shape of net zero is presenting itself within the province. And to do that, we have today Derek Ellis, who is the Director of Sustainability Division for the Department of Environment, Energy and Climate Action. We also have from Halifax, Keith Robertson and Jennifer Corson from Saltaire Design. Our talk today will start with Derek, and then we'll trade off and talk with our Halifax architects and what they're doing in net zero design. Hello, Derek, and thanks. You have a little presentation, and I'll let you introduce yourself and the scope of your work currently for the province.
Thanks, Bill. So thanks to you, Bill, and the Architects Association of PEI. I'm happy to be here to chat about our plans, province of PEI, to reach net zero GHG emissions. So I wanted just to introduce myself. I'm probably speaking to a group that knows a whole lot more about buildings than I do, but it is a topic that's near and dear to me, coming from running the rebate programs at Efficiency PEI on the residential side in my previous role in government. So we launched programs on solar PV, so incentives for solar, building envelope upgrades, heating system upgrades as well. So this is a topic that's not new to me, but one that I'm quite passionate about. In my current role as the Director of the Sustainability Division, I am responsible for our net zero pathway across all sectors. So I'm a little bit of a generalist, but I'm happy to chat about how the building sector fits into our path to net zero on PEI. So I'll just go through a few slides here, and happy to take some questions at the end, and maybe I'll ask you folks a few as well. So just to start, our vision here on PEI is to become Canada's first net zero province, and a model that we can be proud of and other jurisdictions can follow. So we think we can get there about 10 years ahead of the federal target. And I'm actually working with some colleagues here at the province developing that plan right now. So we're in the final stages of development. This slide is really just an infographic to show that it's not something that government can do alone or industry can do alone. We need everyone to buy in and be along for the ride here. And we think that we can do this sustainably, and I think that all islanders can benefit along the way. But in order to understand exactly where we're headed here, I think we should show a slide here of kind of where we've started and where we intend to go. Like I said, we're working on a 20-year plan here to reach GHG emissions. We're not starting from scratch. We've made some really good progress as a province, not just on the renewable energy generation side, but also with our suite of programs at Efficiency PEI that encourage fuel switching. Most people on the other side of the screen here are probably aware of our heat pump rebate program, but there's a wide variety of other programs on the building envelope upgrades. We have some low-income programs as well that help folks make the energy efficiency upgrades that will reduce our emissions and our carbon footprint as an island. The 2030 target is our net zero energy target. So to sort of simplify that, we're looking at decarbonizing all of our energy sources. And then by 2040, reaching net zero GHG emissions. So that would include non-energy emissions as well. And again, that would be well ahead of our national 2050 net zero target. Where we are today, well, we have about 18% of our GHG emissions coming from the building sector. So, on the left of the slide here, you'll see transportation makes up quite a percentage of our emissions profile here at 44%. These are our 2019 numbers, the most recent numbers we've got. Ag at about a quarter. Buildings coming in at 18%, and then industry and waste at 8% and 4% respectively. On the right, showing that buildings as a percentage of PEI's total emissions are on the decline. It's showing the breakdown here between our residential and the service industry. I would consider that the commercial building sector. As a percentage, since 1990, we started at roughly 30% of our emissions coming from buildings, and we've reduced that considerably, not just as a percentage of overall emissions, but as well as our actual emissions from buildings have been on the decline since then. And I would give a lot of credit to the programs at Efficiency PEI. We're reducing our reliance on fossil fuels, home heating oil, and we've seen a real influx of heat pump installations here over the past 10 plus years. So really one of the ways that we've been reducing our emissions in this sector is by fuel switching. I'll get into a little bit of what we intend to do, and you'll see a little bit of a sneak peek from our soon to be released net zero plan for the province. So in general, we've got three main goals for this chapter. The first is to make existing homes and buildings more energy efficient. So facilitating retrofits, the adoption of energy efficient measures and switching to cleaner fuels in island homes, businesses, and government buildings. So we're talking then about the existing buildings. Secondly, we'll construct or try to incentivize the construction of more efficient homes and buildings. To do that, we think we need to be at the forefront of national building code adoption, the adoption of stretch codes beyond the current building code on PEI. And thirdly, we would like to pilot and scale up cost-effective solutions on PEI. So looking to become a demonstration site to scale up and pilot early stage and innovative systems and technologies. And what I'm talking about there is not just heating systems, but building materials, on building envelope materials, windows, doors, insulation, you name it. So anything that can reduce our carbon footprint in this sector, we would like to be at the forefront in researching those and scaling up and deploying those technologies. So I think those are our three high-level goals for this sector. And I'll get into a little more detail on all three here on the next few slides. So firstly, and this may be the most difficult of all three, is to make existing homes and buildings more energy efficient. So we know that we need to facilitate the adoption of energy efficient measures. And to do that, we're talking realistically about fuel switching here, which is a little more complicated than simply choosing a non-emitting heating source on a new building. We're talking about going into existing buildings, whether they've got boilers or furnaces, and trying our best to retrofit those. We got to make sure if we're doing these fuel switching measures, that we don't forget about the building envelope upgrades and the potential to reduce our energy use as well. I think it's important to do that as we fuel switch so that we can minimize our impact on the electricity grid as we electrify heating systems. So our priorities here are to provide incentives to support islanders and businesses in accessing affordable solutions here, developing policies to ensure low-income houses or households are able to invest in high-efficiency technologies and benefit from energy cost savings. So I think in particular that second bullet there, with the lower income demographic, for the most part, those are the folks that are most in need of the energy efficiency upgrades and likely the least able to afford those upgrades. So we will have, moving forward, a focus on the lower income demographic here as we help everyone fuel switch in a sustainable manner. And our anticipated outcome here is that 100% of homes and buildings have a non-emitting heat source as their primary heating system by 2040. On the second goal here, constructing more efficient homes and buildings. So we'd like to be at the forefront of national building codes and the adoption of stretch codes for PEI. So we're looking to establish the necessary environment and supports to facilitate the adoption of the National Building Code and the National Energy Code, develop and support the adoption of stretched or advanced code provisions for PEI that exceed national building codes, lead by example through investments in net zero ready, net zero new construction of government buildings, including schools and hospitals in partnership with the federal government. We'd like to provide incentives to support the growth in building affordable energy efficient homes and commercial buildings, including programs specific to the needs of low-income islanders. So in this case, we're doing what we can to be at the forefront at national building code adoption. We also want to make sure that when people are making these decisions on their new buildings, whether home, residential or commercial buildings, that we're incentivizing them to make the best decision that possible to reduce their energy consumption and to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. We can do that essentially by carrots and sticks, and one of the tools we have at our disposal is the new home construction, for example, the new home construction program at Efficiency PEI. So in this slide, for new builds, our anticipated outcome is 100% adoption of the National Building and Energy Codes, 100% adoption of stretch codes, and as well mandatory energy performance labeling on any building sold in PEI as of 2030. And maybe that will garner some questions here at the end of the presentation, I hope. And lastly, we'd like to pilot and scale up cost-effective solutions. We'd like to become, as a province, a demonstration site to pilot and scale up those early stage and innovative systems and technologies as it relates to building science. So our priorities include working with industry and research entities, educational institutions in the identification of innovative opportunities. We'd like to provide support and incentives to pilot projects have the potential to make an impact, and those that may be well suited to PEI. So in this case, our anticipated outcome here is investment in innovative projects to result in affordable, energy efficient building solutions by 2030. So we'd like to be at the center of building science research. We'd like to be piloting and scaling up those solutions, whether those are, again, heating systems or building envelope materials, you name it. anything that we think may reduce our GHG emissions, I think is worth investing in and we'll be exploring. My last slide here is a little bit of a summary. It includes some fairly lofty targets within this sector. So we've set some targets here for 2030 and 2040. 2030 target is reducing emissions, so using 2015 as our baseline, reducing emissions by 65 to 70%, and by 2040 reducing emissions by 85 to 95%. So we think that's attainable for a number of reasons, but I think the number one driver here is that we do have technologies that are affordable and deployable today, not just heat pumps, but ground source heat pumps. We have solar PV is really is on the rise on PEI. Those installations are doing really well. Insulation contractors are busier than ever. So we think that is, while lofty targets, these are attainable ones. PEI's path to net zero building, to summarize here, is to have 100% of homes and buildings having non-emitting heat sources as their primary heating system by 2040. 100% adoption of the National Building Code and energy codes, as well as stretch codes. Mandatory energy performance labeling on any building sold in PEI. And investment in innovative projects that will result in affordable, energy efficient building solutions. So this is one, just to summarize here, that this sector in particular is one where we've made some really good progress to date on PEI. There's significant momentum in moving away from fossil fuel heat. We've got some, I would say, a really mature suite of programs here, government incentive programs delivered through Efficiency PEI that all lead to some really good momentum in the right direction. So really happy, to share some of these targets here with you folks, and interested to hear, some of your questions, and I'll throw it back to Bill.
Well, thanks very much, Derek, for giving us a broad overview of all of these different programs and incentives. I don't see any questions coming up right now, but I will start. One of the things I'd like to ask about would be some of the incentive examples. And if you could perhaps describe to me what would be the most sensible, as a homeowner, the most sensible or easiest incentive that I might be able to look at employing into my house, given it's an existing house.
Sure. Generally, the best bang for buck is to start with your building envelope, so air sealing and insulation. So, I've hammered that home to all Efficiency PEI clients that I've talked with, and generally speaking, the payback period on those upgrades is extremely short. I'll use my own home as an example, a mid-80s bungalow in Cornwall. Spent roughly $4,000 in insulation, as well as an air exchanger after I tightened things up, and received just shy of $3,000 in rebates. So the payback period on that one was under 2 years for me. I had significant energy savings year one, probably in the range of 30, high 20s, 30%. So the cheapest is always the air sealing, those upgrades. So for the cost of a spray foam can and a tube of caulking, you can really reduce the draft in your home, and then you work your way up to the insulation upgrades. The low-hanging fruit usually being in an uninsulated basement, for example. So, at Efficiency PEI ran a low-income program where we would send in an energy auditor into residential homes and cover the cost of usually building envelope upgrades. generally speaking, the best, the best bang for buck was always basement and attic insulation in those cases. So it varies house to house, but if you've got a drafty home, I would start there.
So if you're planning to go ahead and do something to your own home, seems to me a sort of a broad approach is suggested. Would you recommend an energy audit on your home as well before you start doing the work? That's the first question. Second, would someone be able to do it themselves and still capitalize on the incentives that come with it?
Yeah, so I always recommend starting with an energy audit. You'll get some really good feedback from that audit report on where your heat loss is happening. Generally where the opportunities are as well for reducing your energy consumption, and really the only missing link there is to cost those upgrades and do a calculation of your payback period. So I would always start with an energy audit, and you'll have an idea of the scale of that opportunity for energy reductions or energy consumption reductions. Depending on the program, you can access it with or without an energy audit. So specifically on the building envelope upgrades, we have a program called our home insulation program, and it requires an energy audit in order to access rebates. So that is a bit of a no-brainer to start with an energy audit. And then, generally speaking, your low-hanging fruit is going to be in the building envelope. So you'll benefit from having an energy audit done. The one program we do have at Efficiency PEI is our energy efficient equipment rebate program, and that's where our heat pump rebate resides. In that program, it essentially is a mail-in rebate program. So you install a heat pump, for example, a wood stove, heat recovery ventilator, and you mail in an application and a paid invoice, and you receive a rebate. So you can access some of our rebates at Efficiency without an energy audit, but I always recommend starting with that step.
That's excellent. The other item that I thought was quite interesting is this idea of energy performance labeling, as if it were, and this is all homes, a mandatory labeling process that would be required in the selling of homes, I guess reselling of old, but new homes. I'm assuming this is some sort of label that's going to tell you what the energy performance of the structure would be and what the owner would expect to be paying for their energy bills.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we think that's important because, generally when you're buying a home, you're quantifying almost every other cost aside from your energy costs before you make that investment. So, your biggest unknown going in is what's my utility costs here? How much am I going to spend on electricity, oil, you name it, tends to be, a huge unknown. And we think that can either be, a selling feature if it is a very efficient home, or a deterrent if it's not, and rightfully so. So I think if people have that true measurement when they go to make that, probably the biggest investment they'll make in their lives, then you'll have an informed buyer, but you'll also be motivating sellers to make sure that building is an efficient one. So it's, I think, a tool that would work in the best interest of everyone, and further the goals of the province. And all that to say that I think it would increase the transparency of what your actual costs would be monthly whether you're a residential buyer or a commercial buyer, and allow you to make those informed decisions, and certainly help you be less likely to default on your mortgage in the future.
Thank you. And then just one question from my perspective as an architect, where sustainability is near and dear to everything that we do in our profession. And we've seen how there's been terrific response and terrific movement right now within the province on net zero ambitions in terms of new government buildings, and certainly within Charlottetown as well, within managed city buildings for Charlottetown. What I'd like to know is there been more discussion about that for other outlying regions? Are you aware of other municipalities that are trying to push to incorporate a net zero standard within their new buildings?
So at this point to date, I haven't had any discussions directly with other municipalities. I always point to the city of Summerside being sort of leaders on on PEI in terms of renewable energy generation and GHG reductions. So I can't speak for them. I would assume there are probably some plans in place there, and obviously with City of Charlottetown announcing recently a new building as well out by the airport that will be net zero, among others. So I think one of the jobs here of us government folks is to try to help some of the smaller municipalities, smaller communities make these sorts of investments, whether they're on their local community centers, rinks, schools, you name it. So we've had a few projects certainly on our own schools and government, provincial government-owned buildings, but looking forward to partnering with communities as well in the near future.
Well, thank you very much, Derek. I think that was a really good primer on what we understand net zero to be within the province at this point and some of the strategies. I think we're going to see some really exponentially good returns start to happen within the province and within the building industry. We're quite excited to start to roll that out and make it sort of central to what we do in our design. And also to help and educate the public that this is an important topic. Climate change is here and it's real, and our role in reducing greenhouse gas emissions is very real, and there's a tangible way to work through this. So thank you very much. I think I might have one more question before you go.
Sure.
No, I don't. It's coming up. I'll get to that question later. Oh, no, just one more. It's from Michelle. I just had built a new home and applied for a new construction rebate. However, through my assessment, I found out that my home was too small. I specifically designed small in order to be more energy efficient to meet the rebate threshold requirements. Shouldn't building small be incentivized, as it is one of the best starting points for energy savings? That's actually quite a good question. Does the rebate program currently sort of miss that small home idea and the efforts there?
Yeah, I think at Efficiency our managers are aware of that gap and are currently working on a solution to that would essentially incorporate your base load, and so stay tuned for some changes to the new home construction program in general, but we're aware that there is a little bit of a gap for those smaller homes. The way that program is currently set up is you would get a $2,000 rebate for being 20% above code, and a $5,000 rebate for being 50% above code. But Michelle is certainly right. It is difficult, especially to reach that 50% threshold in a smaller home. So we do have a proposed change to that program that would address that.
Terrific. Thanks very much, Derek. That was actually a great question to come in late here. I really appreciate your time delivering a terrific rundown of what's going on within the province and where we think we can get to in 2040. So I appreciate your time very much.
Thanks, Bill. My pleasure. Thanks,
Thank
guys.
you. So our next guest panelists today on our Architecture Day here in PEI are the two principals, founding principals, a team of Keith Robertson and Jennifer Corson from Solitaire Design. So there's a hello in Halifax. How are you?
Hi, Bill.
It's good to see you up
Great,
here.
thanks.
So I'll give you just a brief introduction. Keith will speak about the importance of net zero in the design of buildings, but he's also wanting to do a brief overview of the evolving net zero landscape, where there's still much more discussion on how to design buildings for net zero operational emissions. The embodied impact of the materials in a project remains a blind spot in the construction industry. Keith will walk through current directions that the industry is starting to move, what to watch for, how the tools are being developed, and what the challenges are in seeing these in these early stages of net zero design. Jennifer will also be part of that discussion. Jennifer being the other principal of Solitaire Design. Jennifer had traveled to Ghana with their family, both Keith and Jennifer, to work with the local community to design and construct an off-grid rammed earth library that truly serves the needs of the community. Since then, multiple new projects, including providing improved access to water and sanitation and education, have been in the focus of their work. AAPI has been a kind supporter of this program from its inception, and will be here and will like to hear how our donations have contributed to the overall success of this Build for Ghana projects program. So I will leave it up to you to start into talking about what's happening in net zero design in your practice in Nova Scotia and what it means currently in Atlantic Canada.
Terrific. Well, thanks. First of all, thanks very much for the AAPEI inviting us to participate. We're very happy to be here. As we proceed, I think Jennifer will highlight that connection, a special connection we've had with AAPEI through our connection with Ghana. So that's been something that's been near and dear to our hearts as well. And Jennifer and I aren't very good at following directions all the time. So you probably saw this slotted as two separate presentations. We're actually going to do a tag team through the presentation leading up to the Ghana presentation that Jennifer will talk about. So I'll start, and even though I've said we're going to talk about the presentation is titled "How Heavy is Your Building?" We're going to be talking a lot more about the weight of buildings than just the weight of buildings. So we're ready to screen share if you want to take that ahead. Terrific. Okay. So as Bill had said, the embodied carbon is a bit of a blind spot, but we're going to talk a bit in net zero has kind of been the first points of discussion that have been in the industry. And then embodied carbon is now coming more and more into the discussion. We're going to talk about it in reverse. I'm going to talk about embodied carbon first, and then we'll start to intersperse the net zero discussion. I think the reason is obvious. This declaration from a couple of years ago, the Architects Declare, is one that a lot of firms across the country have signed on to, and it's really about action and urgent action. And in fact, the AIA and REIC kind of have resounding support for that we need to take action. We need to take it urgently and with sustained and significant action. So I'm going to take this first stepping off point, talking about Buckminster Fuller. Buckminster Fuller, of course, we all know him for his iconic geodesic dome, but he was sort of a visionary and inventor, did a lot more than that. But through that, we know him as somebody that's, I would say, even obsessed with creating the most from the least. So the geodesic dome, of course, he's trying to create a structure with a large volume area and a minimal surface area, and at the same time, making it as lightweight as possible. He went a lot beyond that, though. So you can see on the right-hand side, there's the picture of, I'm sure there's an Airbnb joke in there somewhere, but there he's talking about the transportability of structures, the material efficiency of structures. And he did more than just do geodesic domes. He did do house designs that were aiming towards energy efficiency and self-sufficiency that, again, were still material efficient. The center image is one of a bathroom that he patented. And this was done as a modular, it was a pre-assembled, came in 3 pieces that were all pre-plumbed, that could be carried up a set of stairs by 2 people, and then assembled in place with all the fixtures, all the fittings ready just to connect and go. The interesting thing about this patent in 1938, 1940, I believe, he was at that point talking about composting toilets, and he had invented a shower that could clean hygienically and thoroughly with using only a cup of water. And then when we go to the left-hand side, you see his development of what he called the Dymaxion bus or Dymaxion car. That was a vehicle that could hold 11 people, that could travel up to 90 miles an hour, and had an efficiency of 30 miles per gallon, which even today would be tremendous standards for a vehicle with a capacity of 11 people. Then in the bottom left, you'll see a picture of, that's actually Norman Foster, who had commissioned a replica of the Dymaxion car to be built. So he actually does own that. And Norman Foster and Buckminster Fuller had a professional friendship that went back a long ways, to the point that Norman was giving Buckminster a tour of the Sainsbury Centre. This might look familiar to a lot of people in the architectural industry in Norwich, England. And Foster was well known for his light and airy structures, and this is sort of exemplary of that. But at the end of the tour, they went for coffee, and Buckminster says, "But Norman, how much does your building weigh?" And he didn't have an answer for that. And I think most architects would not have an answer. Perhaps our structural engineers would, but we'd be hard pressed to say how much a building weighs. But by the end of the week, he did have the answer. It was 5,328 tons, and most of it was hidden below ground. So it sort of leads into where we're going now with talking about the impact of materials and the weight of materials. And where Buckminster was kind of focused on the mass of materials, we're now moving into something where it's not just mass, it's the emissions associated with materials. And this slide here shows an example. Siegel and Strain Architects did a very detailed life cycle analysis of the structure and envelope materials and finishes in a commercial building. And on the left-hand side, you'll see the mass of each of those products. On the right-hand side, you see the emissions associated with those products. And it's quite different. So you see that by mass, it's looks like it's about 80% concrete. But the emissions from concrete is only about a third of that. And likewise, the XPS, extruded polystyrene insulation, doesn't even, or barely even shows up as a line on the mass side, but it becomes quite significant on the emissions piece. So what are we talking about when we're talking about emissions? For the most part, we're talking about CO2, carbon dioxide. And people often use CO2 and carbon interchangeably, but our buildings don't have carbon emissions, they have carbon dioxide emissions. And they have other emissions as well. But in general, we're talking about greenhouse gases, GHGs. And because there are other greenhouse gases other than carbon dioxide, we usually see it expressed as a CO2 equivalent, or CO2e. So that's what you'll see in the terminology. And when you're talking about materials, they talk about emissions in terms of global warming potential. That's what the significant focus is on materials. But there are a lot of other impacts that materials have. So just to put that out there, that we're not talking about acidification and particulate and smog and a bunch of other impacts that materials have. So when you get into that type of analysis, it can change the game a little bit as well. So this is a simplified chart from Bruce King's book, The New Carbon Architecture. And I want you to take a look at this. So you'll see there's 2 parts to this chart. There's a beginning curve here called embodied carbon. And that's what we're talking about, the energy that goes into making the materials that go into the construction. This chart shows over a 90-year time span. And up till now, the conventional wisdom has been we don't worry about this carbon emissions part or the embodied carbon part because it is such a small part of the overall. But just take note of this. We're talking about this small embodied carbon bit, and then there's emissions that happen year by year over the life of the building until it is finally demolished. So that's kind of the overall carbon footprint of the building.
But the embodied carbon, maybe we should just make that a bit more particular. It's the carbon involved in the manufacturing of those materials.
That's right. We'll talk a bit more about where that embodied carbon, what that impact is. But I think most of us could agree that we don't have 90 years or 100 years of a building life that we need to look at. We're looking at something more immediate. 2050 by Canadian targets to be net zero, 2040, which is fantastic to hear for PEI's goal. And some people are even saying 2030 is what we should be looking at. So if we narrow that down, then this embodied carbon piece becomes a lot more significant. The other part of it is the efficiency of the operating efficiency of the building becomes a factor as well. So obviously, the less efficient a building is, the steeper this emissions curve along the top is. If we build an energy efficient building, that curve becomes much less. And for all intents and purposes, a net zero building has no operating emissions along this line as well. So when you get to a net zero building, almost all of its emissions are associated with the embodied carbon. And that's why, as we talk about the net zero emissions or operations part, we need to talk about the embodied carbon part as well. And the other thing that's important about embodied carbon is it happens before the building is even opened. So that impact happens for the life of the building, as opposed to incrementally in tons per year of operation. And a ton of CO2 that's emitted at the beginning of the building actually has a greater impact than a ton that is emitted on the 10th year or the 30th year or the 100th year. So the time value of CO2 is also an important factor. Now here's another one to think about. Another strategy is, why should we build new when we can retrofit? So we have a significant amount of embodied energy, embodied carbon, embodied emissions that are associated with buildings that are already built. So what happens if we retrofit those and improve the performance of those as opposed to building new? And I'll show an example of that later on. So here's the hypothetical. The embodied energy in a high performance building here is much lower than a new building. And if you do it with a high performance retrofit, then its emissions are going to be lower even than the embodied carbon of a new building. Now, when we talk about the embodied impacts, this is an internationally acknowledged life cycle stages of materials. There's the product stage, which is A1, A2, A3. That's when the product is being manufactured. Then there's the construction stage, then the use stage, and the end of life stage. Each of those does contribute to the overall life cycle or overall impact of a product or a project. But if we look at it, how that breaks down, here's a school that we did a life cycle assessment for. We looked at the envelope and the structure. So there's two things that immediately jump out at us. One is that the structure, in this case, was by far the greater impact than the envelope. The second thing that is obvious is that first stages of manufacture in blue here, and then the construction, transportation and construction, take up 80% or more of that impact. So a lot of that impact happens right at the very beginning of the project, and much less so that carries on through the life, through the use stage and the end of life stage. If we take a look at a breakdown of that, of the envelope versus the structure, we'll see that the roof structure in this case was the most significant piece, and foundations and slabs and floors were sort of on the lower end. But overall, the structure remains to be the most significant piece. Now, one strategy for dealing with carbon is to look at the very fundamentals. What is the project made out of? And here's taking a very simple model using the Athena Impact Estimator life cycle analysis program, where I just took a 30 by 30 meter single floor, and I did three designs. One was with steel columns and beams using a 7.5 meter by 7.5 meter grid. Another was using concrete on the same grid. concrete with a 6 meter by 6 meter grid, and wood with a 6 meter by 6 meter grid. And the output that comes from Athena clearly shows us that wood is a lower impact structural system, and that's not a surprise, I think. Shows that even within a simple, the same construction systems, that the way you design the spans and the complexity of the design make an impact as well. When it comes to looking at materials themselves, there's a lot to take into consideration, and every product usually has a fairly significant range of options. So here's an example taken from the Architecture 2030 site of just looking at the carbon impact of insulation materials. So you can see at the very top, extruded polystyrene is talking about the emissions associated with using polystyrene in a project compared to closed cell spray foam, and HFC or HFO are two different types, or expanded polystyrene. And then as we come down to lower and lower impact mineral wool and fiberglass and denim, now we're starting to get into natural materials. And the reason that they're on the opposite side of this center line is that they actually sequester carbon. So as they're growing or being produced, there's actually carbon dioxide that is absorbed as they grow. So that's when you get into these products that in fact have a negative impact in a positive way on the greenhouse gas emissions. And you'll see more and more carbon sequestering materials come onto the marketplace already. There already are quite a few. It's often in the finishes and framing and insulation materials. I'm not going to go through this entire list, but you'll see this as a growing list of products that actually sequester carbon in them, so they counteract the adverse effects of materials. And here's an example, institutional example of Vancouver Convention Centre. Maybe this is going a little bit over the top in its use of wood, but it does show that it does have use of wood as a finished material. And without getting into a lot of detail here, there's a lot of debate about how you account for wood. Yes, wood is a lower energy material, but what is the source of that wood? And for example, if we all decided to build all buildings out of wood right now, we would be in, I think, dire straits from a forestry industry, and we'd have a lot of other unintended consequences.
So I'm going to jump in here at this point to answer Bill's question about what we're up to here at Soltaire on this topic. And Keith, as you can probably tell, he dives deep into all things kind of advanced and leading in green building, and has now for a number of decades. And we've been able to expand this discussion into the school system. We've been teaching at the School of Architecture in the master's program for the last 3 years, a design and tech collaborative or co-requisite course called Net Positive Architecture. And we're really pleased that this school is seeing that this needs to be something particularly focused on within their curriculum. And it's been a really fun opportunity for a team of us at Soltaire, 4 of us, in fact, teaching as a collaborative. And this is a screenshot from a concept board kind of data generating, idea generating conversation we had with our students. And in the past 2 of the 3 years we've been teaching, it's been online, so that's been an interesting one. We're seeing that the vocabulary is getting really rich. It's not just all called green building or being a green architect or a green firm. And certainly we're in this net zero conversation, but we're really needing to push it all the way towards a regenerative building. So we're talking about doing less harm on the carbon front, as Keith has outlined, and in pushing our work towards net zero and net zero carbon, where we're doing less harm or better, but living building challenge, of which we have a few examples of locally or in the country and a few more worldwide, is a program that we can work towards. We have yet to have a living building certified project here at Soltaire, But we're talking about adaptive building towards restorative building. And in fact, we should, our sites should be on regenerative building as the ultimate goal, where we can be enhancing our ecosystems rather than just thinking that we're doing better. Or, so there's some pretty exciting work out there worldwide, and certainly students with their curiosity and researching minds are pushing us, and we're kind of along for the ride on that front. Some of the projects that are a little closer to home that we have looked into more thoroughly, this one, you might be familiar with it. Chris Magwood is a colleague at the Endeavour Centre in Peterborough, Ontario, where Chris has not only easily achieved the net zero energy on this project, or almost all of his projects, but looking at zero carbon, zero toxins, zero construction waste. I think this project called the Zero House, in fact, had a bag and a half of commingled waste, like one garbage bag and a half, not even a ton and a half, that we would all normally be looking at on our LEED spreadsheets. This house has been disassembled and re-erected, I believe, 3 times as a demonstration to show that designing for disassembly with low carbon materials, if not those materials on the blue side of Keith's chart, allows this project to be just a fantastic example of heading towards regenerative. Another project, one that's been interesting, certainly scale-wise, is looking at it outside of the residential field. This is out of Nottingham, UK. We're seeing a lot of the projects pushing the boundaries or heading into Living Building Challenge are in the university or in the research facilities, where budgets tend to be available or promoted, and that scale of building being, or this one being almost a 50,000 square foot structure, a 2-story structure. It's a chemical research lab at the university, where that type of operation is a high energy consuming one. So for them to hit the net zero and being net carbon as well is quite an achievement. On this side of the Atlantic is the Joyce Center at the Mohawk College in Hamilton. Zero carbon certified. You'll see these are recent projects. I should comment on that, and that's quite interesting in terms of how few examples are out there, because looking at things this way with a carbon lens is relatively new in terms of assessments and certification. The Joyce Center is about double the size of the Nottingham project, and it's the largest certified educational building at 96,000 square feet, and it's net zero certified through the Canadian Green Building Council. Much smaller in scale and much older is our own Solterra Concept House. This is a project that Keith and I started designing over a decade ago and was finished in 2012. It was really a chance for us to have an opportunity to try out this stuff, frankly, that our clients were asking us about. And we wanted to have more confidence and more experience in presenting those aspects of projects in their work, being off-grid. Hitting a platinum LEED for Homes certification level is something we'd done prior, and we did so as well on this project. Passive House certified, which is a challenge, because in an off-grid house, which it is, there are many conflicting things in terms of ventilation and efficiencies that get a little challenging. So we believe at the time it's the only LEED for Homes Platinum Passive House certified off-grid project in North America. I think there's a few others now around. We are solar, hot water heated, and solar powered. It's a 1-story, and considering considering aging in place was a real key, as it is for almost all of our projects on the boards right now. And many of you may know of me as a salvager and a reuser of all things. So we've incorporated a lot of salvaged and locally produced materials in the construction. And insulation was a no-brainer for us in the world that we're working within. So 12 years later, it looks something like this, where you'll see both the PV system on the back shed roof and the solar thermal on the front sloped roof. It also has a green roof, which grows a variety of things depending on what the birds drop on it seed-wise. It varies from year to year. And it's been a great opportunity for us to showcase and show people and have meetings there, especially in COVID. That's been our remote working office, tours, concerts, an easy space to teach from and share information from. The assemblies, a lot of this information is available, so if any are interested, happy to point you towards the website. There's also a link on it, which is an open source link to our data, our live data on the concept house. You can see how our PV system is doing. We monitor what the temperatures are. Really, it's to ensure that the performance that we strove to meet in design is still the case decades later, let alone just the few years it's been. And to be honest, it's kind of fun just to look and say, hey, you know what? It's 21 degrees in the house. Let's head down there.
And it also points out when we first started down this path, we were of the understanding that a passive house should never freeze. And we were a little bit skeptical about that. But in fact, when we're not there all year round, when we go away, if we're gone for a week or 2 weeks or a month in the middle of winter, everything is shut off. It runs entirely passively. And this has proven to us that it typically gets down to maybe 15 degrees Celsius in the winter. So it's proven that point.
And being off-grid, we like the few bills that, in fact, that ever come from it, except for property taxes. So we're in the process of actually renovating a circa 1890 building in Lunenburg so that the concept house can become full-time for us.
I'd ask you to remember what that chart was that I first showed you. Here's my version of it for the concept house. So we were building sort of pre-2010. And what I'm doing in this chart is showing two things. If we had done the same house, same size, same square footage to an R2000 plus standard, this is what that life cycle, total life emissions would be. Here's the embodied carbon part. And then using our Nova Scotia grid, I modeled this using a heat pump. And Nova Scotia grid admittedly is not terribly clean. If we were talking about the PEI grid, and in fact, the modeling actually forces you to use New Brunswick's emission standards. It is much cleaner than Nova Scotia, but you're still on a trajectory that's about half of what this is. So if we had done an R2000 for our house, that's what that profile would have looked like. What actually happened is our embodied carbon is actually higher. We put in thicker walls, we put in more insulation, and here I included the cost of the the impact of the photovoltaics and batteries that are involved. So our embodied energy is actually significantly higher, but being virtually zero emissions, being off-grid, we do have some fossil fuel use, and that's just for backup heat for our domestic hot water and for our cooking. So that's what our emissions look like because of the system we did. And so you can see that the investment in the additional embodied energy and the insulation paid itself back within about 2 years.
That's our good news story, that we've got the proof in the pudding. If you want to hit on grid, no?
No,
we'll head forward.
Yeah.
2015 already. Saltstone is one of our projects where we are blessed that clients come to us wanting us to push the proverbial envelope. who wanted to hit a passive house certification here and hit net zero. The one other challenge, as all projects have their various challenges, this one, the site had no accessible water. Previous attempts to drill and to dig came up salt water. Hundreds of thousands of dollars had been attempted, which is why the property came affordably to these clients who had the understanding, the inkling that in fact we could do a rainwater collection system for 100% of their use, which really drove the butterfly roof here. So we collect off of both of these surfaces down to a cistern through those columns that you get a little peek of. This is on the rocky terrain near Peggy's Cove, if you're familiar with the South Shore area. And that was a project where the clients are pretty excited when their first year bill, it took a bit for it to hit that net zero, but in fact, that client and this one both receive a paycheck from Nova Scotia Power. This is called Groundswell. It's a 1,900 odd square foot, one story grid tied house. Lots of carbon intensity here. This client was keen to install probably even more PV than was required to net it out. I think their check is bigger for this project, and the house is probably half the size of Saltstone that I showed you previously. Here, a typical combination for us is a really deep wall, deep roof assembly, cellulose insulation, kind of that easy choice from the carbon list that we showed you. So walls are hitting like an R56, I think, and a roof over 100 with a heat pump and a high efficiency wood stove. As Derek mentioned, the trickier project, the one that's very rewarding, is to look at deep energy retrofits on existing buildings and really where, with the building stock that we have, our focus needs to look at these types of projects. Sometimes that blank slate on an open piece of land for a single family residential, there's sometimes a little guilt there. So we're happy to balance the firm's work with some infill and intensive retrofit. Ecology Action Center, as a client, you can never ask for one that would have even higher goals than our firm's focus. They really challenged us at every stage, and we worked collaboratively to hit all their targets. And I'll go through some of those. It was this is probably a very typical looking building. It was a 2-story residential salt box years ago, built in 1915. It had a considerable renovation in 2015, which actually caused us more of a challenge because of the materials that were introduced in 2015 as steps towards higher energy efficiency. With working with a group and with an existing building that had many issues, we use we call it our green decision matrix as a way to help prioritize green issues or interest from our client, and especially when there are multiple people around the table. And this client needed 50% more space and had a high concern about energy security with relation to GHGs, and wanted to focus on renewables. They had a very poor indoor air quality as well, so that was a close second in terms of focus on choice of materials, and healthy materials. So the project is underway. You can see it's kind of gained a story here. We split and dropped the main floor so that we could have an accessible half floor, something that's a super challenge on urban locations in terms of getting our older building stock to meet accessibility requirements. You'll see the assembly here is a rock wool kind of combination in terms of the wall assembly. The foundation was reused as well. I can get into some of that on these pictures. I just have a summary here of some of our...
That previous picture perfectly highlights what Derek had said from the beginning, of that in terms of dealing with existing buildings, deal with airtightness and insulation. So there's a perfect demonstration of that.
Good point. So in fact, yeah, so with the increasing the office space by 62%, we actually, with the PV, we decreased the energy consumption by 65%, and the PV system offsets 50% of that. So they're down to a low operational budget going forward. As a nonprofit, certainly important. And the outcome as the choice to stay in the neighborhood and to have an example of how to retrofit a century-old building is something that they see as a real win from an educational standpoint, compared to having started even to have removed the building and to have built a new 3-story building. So a project that near and dear to my heart, saved a lot of its existing structure in terms of the 90 tons of concrete in the foundation. All of these things can be calculated from its effect sequestering that material, in a sense. 40 tons of wood, 3 tons of metal, 20 tons of mixed waste, all worked with, instead of hitting the landfill to build a new efficient building.
So here's this chart again of the embodied carbon, embodied emissions, and the operational emissions. And the previous one, I had talked about doing a standard new construction for a house and a high performance or passive house. Here what we're looking at is, in fact, we had a very real discussion with them right from the beginning. They had options of tearing this building down and building an entirely new net zero building or high performance building. They could sell the building and move out and build off in the industrial park somewhere, and again build high performance. The decision was twofold. One is building, they're in a fairly dense neighborhood in north end of Halifax right now, ideally located in terms of walkability and cyclability. So that has an impact much beyond the building use itself in terms of reducing carbon. So it's very easy to get to. Another part was they wanted to be able to demonstrate that they can use buildings, and we do need to retrofit buildings. So this becomes a demonstration for them how to do that. So what this chart is showing is if they had built the same square footage with a new build at high performance, same sort of levels of performance as we've done with the retrofit, this is what their carbon footprint would be. It would be up over 500 tons of CO2. With their retrofit, their embodied carbon is much, much lower. So they have a much better starting point. And even if we had the same energy input, same high performance systems, et cetera, and again, this is our Nova Scotia grid, we're going to be better performing throughout the life of the building. One of the things they talked about, or one of the things that they're doing, is putting on a PV system, about a 10 kilowatt PV system. So this little bump here accounts for the embodied carbon of the PVs, and that's also why it changes that trajectory of energy. So it shows that on our Nova Scotia grid that the investment in PV, again, pays back very, very quickly. So that leads into discussion about when you are putting in PVs, what is it offsetting? So in the case of Nova Scotia, we're offsetting a relatively dirty grid. It's a different discussion if you're in a scenario or with a utility that has a clean grid. And even in the decarbonized world of, if we're following the trajectory of the federal government mandate of being decarbonized by 2050 and a gradual path to get there, it demonstrates that retrofitting in this case, even at a high performance level, is a better option than building new.
So those are fairly recent projects, and here's a few that are on the boards. Soon to break ground is the Nova Scotia Native Women's Association, and it's a resiliency center for the Millbrook Reserve. It is a 10,000 square foot wood framed project, single story. We're hitting a net zero energy, shooting for net zero carbon on this project. It is wood filled structure and cladding, cellulose for the interior. It's an absolutely ideal site from a passive solar point of view. The layout, it's a two-part building. In essence, it's an office administration wing, and then the resiliency center, which has a cedar room and knowledge room and wellness center, a kitchen and a maker space and a children's area. It's really been a absolutely delightful project to work on with the Nova Scotia Native Women's Association, and I can't tell you some of the things that they are challenged with every day in their working environment, and creating this delightful play space, not only with the interior rooms but exterior, is a really fun project. So our responsibility in making this a highly efficient, energy efficient, and beautiful space is weighs heavy on us, and we're doing that in a very collaborative process with this client group. Bringing our team together includes, from day one, our energy consultant, who we work with pretty well on every project we've got, putting everything on the roof of this project in terms of the PV grid to get us to that net positive. It's about a 63 kilowatt grid system. The orange things that you see there are planning around the skylights, and the mechanicals that are on the rooftop, hidden by our ribbon skirt band of a parapet that you saw. It's a super fun project, and we hope to break ground on that very soon. Also working with the Unamaki Institute of Natural Resources on their administration building and research center. This is up in Cape Breton on the Bredors, hitting net zero energy and hopefully carbon as well. Focusing on wood in a little bit different of a way, with the nail laminated timber that we hope to harvest and process and manufacture locally, spanning our main floor and upper roof structure of this two-story building. It's don't have a pending date on that for construction, but another great example of projects that are pushing that net conversation into the carbon landscape. To summarize, really, again, the work I think that we have in front of us as architects, and our responsibility is to go after how we can repurpose our existing building stock and infrastructure. And if not the entire building in its place, to use as much of it to salvage and recycle those materials, whether it be in situ or in other projects, and to look at that as a resource stream rather than a waste stream. And to look at minimizing that palette of materials that we have in front of us to work with. Just take out a few layers in those assemblies and make them better layers and more carbon focused layers. Our buildings will be better for it in terms of that analysis. And ultimately designing for durability. Here we are 30 years into our careers here at Soltaire, that these things need to be far as living Keith's 30-year point and the 60-year point, and that we can be looking back at them and seeing how they're doing and doing that same analysis going forward. So hopefully that is a good summary of getting us wrapped up on design strategies on low carbon and high performance architecture. If okay with you, Bill, I'm going to jump in and give a brief update on Ghana in honor of World Architecture Day. And I'm hoping that we're also fairly on time. I've got Keith's giving me a little signal, 6 minutes, so I talk quickly. And then if okay, we'll do any Q&A after both presentations. So I'll jump in here. You are absolutely right, Bill, that AAPEI has been a day one supporter of our project, and we can't thank you enough for that. Day one for us was working towards getting our family to Ghana, and this is a crazy whirlwind story that I'm going. For those of you who might not know of our Ghana project, taking you up to today in our current work with it. So here we go. My thesis, a long time ago, in 1990, it took me to Guinea in West Africa, and also some time work in Ghana. And when I was in Ghana, I went to the School of Architecture there. That was a RIBA School of Architecture, the only one outside of Britain. And the dean was so kind to me that he invited me often to his family home, and I just fell in love with his 2-year-old daughter at the time, Coco, who you see on the left. I can't say I was the best at keeping in touch after my long work term there, but fast forward a bunch of years to me recounting about the kindness of the dean, and our kids asking, well, where is Coco now? And so we reached out wanting to return the offer of a home to Coco and invite her to Canada. And I'm kind of embarrassed to say that we weren't able to get her a travel visa as a young, single, educated Black woman to come to Canada. So we made her the promise, a long story short, for us to come and see her and her family. So there she is, our goddaughter, and her children in our daughter's arms. And that was 2014, our first trip to see her. When we made the decision to go, we decided that we can't just go and not do something that actually was the reason I went there in the first place. We reached out, or we Googled Earth Architecture in Ghana, which was the focus of my thesis. And lo and behold, an hour from Kumasi, where Coco's family is, was a small village with a very inspired young man running a nonprofit, running a Redesign the Earth Mud Hut competition, which we immediately reached out and said, we are coming, what can we do to give a hand, help run this competition or workshop, or literally dig if you need. And Frank reached back out to say, well, we could do with a community building, for our school. He was a teacher. And we said, perfect, our children would like to come with us. And if they can go to school there, and if we can help build a community library, that's what we would offer to do. And that's the beginning of our trip to Abitinim. We fundraised prior, and with groups similar to AAPI and friends and family and colleagues, we raised over $30,000 our first year and arrived in Abitinim. This is an aerial view of this village in mid sub-Saharan Africa, very jungle-like, where you clear areas down to dirt to establish living areas and gathering areas. You'll see by kind of the beautiful grid of trees, the orange and palm plantations that surround the village. And in it, a village of 600 people, there was both an elementary and a junior high. Down at ground level, that grid of plantations is not so apparent, but what is a very, very simplistic lifestyle. Most live in very simple buildings, and things like water and electricity are hard fought for. Water is carried from one borehole in the village for the entire village of 600 people, and it's carried manually. There's no distribution at all. Work is mostly manual and communal. To bring in a piece of equipment like an excavator or a dump truck is very costly for those in the village. Arriving in the village, we had to ensure that we had the complete support and agreement of the chief. And there's nothing nearer and dear to their hearts than bringing soccer balls and shirts. So we have this ongoing collaboration between the Halifax City Soccer Club, bringing teams worth of jerseys. And this has a lot of those communal workers happy to join in, because we know we're also supporting their children and their teams nearby. Work got underway almost immediately because our time was so short. We collaborated on a very kind of simple design for this rammed earth building. It's about 3,000 square feet, located a couple of 100 yards from the elementary and junior high. And you'll kind of see large overhangs, a veranda that wraps around the building, broken down into just basically two spaces: the main library with a computer center and a community room. One key thing here was also the cistern and planning for a roof water collection system. Rammed earth construction is something that I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with it. There are examples in Canada, even in Saskatchewan. We have yet to do a rammed earth project in Nova Scotia, but have done many now in Ghana. The library was just a lovely example of working with this community group and crew to ram about 40 to 50 feet of wall, about 3 feet high every day. And so after, I think it was 25, 30 days, we had the walls of our building erected out of this monolithic mixture. There you see it, the walls up and our roof framing with a very large overhang to, one, gather rain, two, provide protection so that the veranda areas, in fact, are like spaces as well. The gathering, the seating against the building around the perimeter becomes key to get out of the intensity of the heat with the Ghanaian climate as well. Surprisingly, with a season of 6 months rain, 6 months no rain, that rain isn't a little further along in design in the community. So we were surprised that we were the first kind of rainwater collection system that was a system different than just having buckets at the bottom of the roof slope. And so our bright orange poly tank is a bit of a front and center, in your face a system that we're showing off. After 89 days, incredibly, it got completed. We worked incredibly hard, but the results were well worth it. And the price, including labor, a little different from our own climate and economy here. We finished it for about $20 a square foot. The interior is just simple and calming and warm from the earth tones that come right from the walls. There's only a clear sealant on it that's basically a white glue and water mixture just to keep the dust down. You'll see the computers in the rear of this main shot, and the adult learning area, and so some smaller kids' tables. And happy to say, every time we return, it is knee-deep with lots of people in it, including actually it's become the daily classroom for the junior high program at this school nearby for the kids to learn their IT course. Amazingly, prior to us getting there, they were learning their IT course using a cardboard box and kind of trying to think of it as a computer screen. And they would hold a rock for a mouse. So we're so pleased to be able to help lead this community into these kids having a chance on their national exams. Other things that happen there are a monthly well baby clinic in the community room, and as I mentioned, the rainwater collection cistern being a other source than the main borehole in the village. And I think one of my favorite things, very similar to working with the Nova Scotia Native Women's Association, is working with women in general. These women are all putting in about 3 to 4 nights a week, taking literacy classes, many of them never having gone to school at all. and there's volunteer teachers, and the library becomes the center place for that learning opportunity. In building the building and fundraising for it, we still are responsible to the community to make sure they can afford to run it into the future. And amazingly, the electric company of Ghana, compared to Nova Scotia Power, charges about triple the amount per kilowatt hour as what we pay here. And on their monthly incomes, that's just not an affordable option. So round two for us was fundraising to go back and take the library off grid. So there's one of our great friends, Alex Ross, who's on the roof with our favorite carpenter, getting the library going off grid. Oh, and if you notice the Nova Scotia flag up there with the Ghanaian and Canadian flag as well. We not only took the library off grid, but in a retrofit of sorts, we helped the energy bills at a community building which houses teachers and has a clinic there as well, and worked with a local artisan who did some incredible mural work. And what we've realized is not always does our work have to be building focused to have an effect. And we wanted to make sure our own footprint wasn't detrimental to being there. And the first year we felt like it was by the amount of water we were drinking out of these half-liter water sachets. We calculated that we were going to be, as a family of 4 over 89 days, using over 1,000 of these water sachets, which the guilt was almost, well, our thirst was overtaken by the guilt, but we felt like we needed to figure something out. So with the kids in the community and with some ingenuity, we worked with the teachers and the kids to create, oh, that is the wrong note under there. It's not a polytank cistern at all. It should say teacher and Lil working on a volleyball net. A weaving project that looked at waste as a resource, again, a topic near to my heart. We took all of those bags that we would have used up in our stay and created a hammock, tried a bunch of different projects, volleyball being another family sport, used other collected bags to create a volleyball net. And I think this process has continued since we've been gone, and there is very little waste on the ground of these plastic sachets. And we've also converted to filters, charcoal filters. So anytime we return, that's minimized as well. Here we are on an education opportunity right now, sharing with you on World Architecture Day. Education for us is also something we see as a key responsibility to supporting the families in this village and other villages that we've met in the meantime, helping their kids through to high school and some beyond that. Although education is free up to the high school system in Ghana, many areas where there isn't a high school, junior high, or even elementary school is the stopping point because the cost of transportation and books and uniforms is too much for most families to afford. So we are supporting, you'll see those kids in the pic. Their moms came to thank us. This has just been a joy to see some of these kids grow up to be soon our first graduating nurse. We have builders and carpenters as well in the mix. So this is one way that your money is continuing to be spent helping our community. Sanitation, this is not the nicest photo, but this is what we arrived at asking about latrines at the school. This was the school latrine, where it's just basically an open pit. The problem of newly manufactured materials like the plastic sachets and without a waste or a collection system is that these manufactured materials just end up being on the ground. So plastics, wrappers, things, there is no place, there's no system to take them to. So it's a real big issue. As is water that we mentioned to you being a scarce commodity. So there's lots of work out there worldwide on sanitation and waterless latrines. We worked with the system in installing one that diverts urine from feces, and urine, who knew that the banana trees love nitrogen-rich urine, so we have the bananas nearby are growing quite well. And then after about 8 to 12 months, the compost that slides down at the base will become usable compost for agriculture. And we have a very simple aerated waterless latrine. The left-hand one being the demonstration and use for visitors to our library, and the other being one of the ones at the school. We've continued to build latrines in various areas. And very simply, just like the water bag sachet, is the ability to look at hygiene. So this is called a tippy tap. I think it's the most ingenious thing, with 3 pieces of wood, actually 4 pieces if you include the foot pedal, a string, and a bucket, where we can have contactless hand washing with the means of just stepping on the stick on the ground, which tips the tippy tap. Our kids were carrying water on their heads in a bowl, and that bowl was outside each classroom every morning, and the first child to use it had the best use, because the next 30 kids using the same bowl of water certainly weren't having the best hygiene practices. But so we've really enjoyed the ability to kind of share and test and try out and support projects as simple as the tippy tap. Other projects outside the building helps look at deforestation, which is not as imminent a threat in the region where we are, because it is fairly lush jungle, but more north. Northern Ghana has a real challenge with deforestation and lack of fuel source, because we still are dealing with communities that primarily cook over open fires. With very simple materials. There's lots of versions of rocket stoves out there. We've worked on school projects for kids to be able to build rocket stoves, which is a earth and ash and water mixture, creating 3 parts. It's a rocket stove on the right, built with the parts that you see on the left, replacing what would be called an open fire or 3-stone fire, which is beside the rocket stove there as well. So the air quality is much improved with a higher efficiency burn on the rocket stove, and it requires far, far less wood, which actually saves hours in the day of walking into the forest to cut that wood for your cooking. And there you see Keith in the classroom. He can't help himself, teaching physics and electricity to a bunch of junior high kids who have that opportunity to put it into practice. So it's kind of like the computer IT class looking at a cardboard box, trying to imagine it working, to actually seeing that it does work. So we brought parts with us for kids to try out their electricity lesson, but in fact, they were building a renewable lighting kit and successful at it with the parts that we brought. This is a program where we provide basic lighting kits to go into each household or into community rooms like this shot, and the batteries are recharged at a solar system, so that lighting is available for study to allow for education or the learning process to happen into evenings, and instead of them burning kerosene or non-rechargeable, crappy quality batteries, that they're getting light through a renewable route. And our team visiting some of those families who are part of our renting program to rent a light and battery kit for their studies. And probably not surprisingly, we've talked about water is not only rainwater collection, but providing access to clean water. This is a talent. This is a 60-pound bucket of water carried on a head, and no wonder the physiques of these women is so strong and so upright. I've failed many times on a 10-pound bucket compared to this one. We have provided community access to water by building cisterns. So this involves a pump and creating a tower where one woman instead of two, although they do like to gather. This is a bit of time to support each other, gathering around the well, but a water carrier can do this independently and getting much better quality water to their home. So that's on our clean water initiatives. There's always lots to do, and I would be remiss if I didn't say what we have on the docket. When we head back, COVID has played havoc with everyone's travel schedules and ours as well, getting back to Ghana. We have plans to return and to initiate some more actual construction projects, including more latrines and community cisterns, and to continue our solar lighting initiative to have that reach further into non-electrified communities. And of course, to keep supporting our kids to get them to become high school graduates. We work with a fantastic organization called ICO. 100% of your donations go straight to our project. There is no admin fee. There's an online link, or just if you take note of innovativecommunities.org. And I do believe, Keith, Bill,
That's it.
how's that for time?
So thanks for letting us put that plug in, and thanks even more so for your support over the past 7 years.
Crazy. Back to you,
Thanks.
or if there's any questions.
First of all, thank you very much for your time and your comprehensive coverage of all things going on in the past, obviously in Nova Scotia, but also currently, but also for bringing our attention to your work, very important work going on in Ghana. And kindly, we certainly urge people to visit your website and make a donation to see more of this good work come to fruition for the projects in Ghana that Soltaire has been spearheading for a number of years. Very good to see. We're starting to see, one question right away here, and I'll start to bring these up. I will just do this. So, Philip Brown, big thanks to Derek, Keith, Jennifer, and Bill for the informative net zero presentation on World Architecture Day. Stay safe. Thank you. Philip Brown is the mayor of Charlottetown. So thanks, Philip. I appreciate that note. I'll start to ask some questions, and I'll probably navigate my way back to sort of the strategies about net zero, what you may have heard before from Derek Ellis. And I suppose what I would pose to you as well is a similar question, that what are the easiest strategies towards a net zero solution?
What we like to start out with is a blank slate that allows an entire team of people to look at it globally and as an integrated team. So ideally, we would have the architect, the owners, the mechanical engineers, electrical engineers, civil engineers, everybody kind of start brainstorming right from the start. But I guess the very first thing is it needs to have the initiative from the owner to begin with. And a keen owner is one of the very most important parts of it, and an involved and informed owner. Another piece is I think you have to acknowledge that we're stepping into some new territory and foster an element of, I don't really want to call it risk-taking, but it's risk-taking when we're trying to move into a territory that hasn't been really done this way in the past. So you have to be able to foster that in the within the design team as well, to allow them to explore ideas and not to be afraid of failure by putting out ideas. And then from that point on, really the first steps are, what can you do passively? So what can you do with dealing with the site, building orientation, building mass, window placement, window performance, envelope performance. So before you start talking about mechanical, electrical systems, do as much as you can with the architecture, let's call it. And then once you've gotten to that point, you reduce your loads as low as you possibly can. And that's when you start talking about systems. So reduce loads first and then bring in systems. And ultimately, when we're talking about net zero, hypothetically, you can net zero, you can net out anything with enough technology. So put enough windmills or enough solar panels on, you can take the worst energy design and make it net zero. But the goal really is to have an energy efficient product and minimize the amount of resources that you need to do on the renewable side.
Well said.
Yeah, thanks. And actually, I would say, just to touch on that topic of minimization of resources, quite obviously the Ghanaian experience is about quite minimal resources, being able to do with a lot with very little, in our North American perception of what a little and what a lot might mean.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if you want to touch on sort of that larger challenge. And in fact, we had someone ask a question earlier about how when they designed for a small house, they weren't able to meet the rebate category cutoff to be able to get that rebate because of such small usage inside of that small home that they designed quite purposely to be a low energy consumer. And maybe you want to touch on that. I certainly have my own opinions, but I want to hear what you might want to say about that.
Yeah, I have to say that we have often talked clients out of space. And as a business person, that's probably a really dumb thing to do, depending on how you strike your fee. But that's where that first step should be in heading towards small footprint. We do very few projects over 2,500 square feet on the single family residential front. Swing spaces, communal spaces, phased projects are all ways that we can reduce that footprint to then start the process that Keith talked about in terms of the minimal palette that becomes our next part. With PEI, and Nova Scotia, a lot part of it with having level sites, that slab on grade where that foundation is your finished floor. Talk about minimizing palette and an opportunity to use it as a thermal mass. And it's just an ideal example of even introducing some recycled aggregate into that mix with some alternates to that binding cement. These are all steps that we can look at in terms of reducing our carbon footprint as well as our the mass side of what building materials we use.
I would think an example that sort of ties the ideas that we've explored in Ghana with Jennifer showed a case study at the Unamaki Institute of Natural Resources. So looking at the resources, the building material resources and skills and labor resources within that community. So that was really what led us to look at this nail laminated timber, which is a very low technology, but it's also a timber resource that was available within their community as well. So looking at available resources that are important to the client, that are important to the community, can be informative as well.
Appropriate technologies that may not be commonplace or something that our students are learning or that necessarily a manufacturer has ready for us to specify, that we actually have to go back to look at what is that thing that we want to use outside of the norm. And I think, Keith's right, there aren't that many examples here, and we find that we're kind of pushing water uphill sometimes when we're looking for a better option or want to remove something right out of our palette of materials. Or sometimes just updating clients on that this is possible. But that's really where we need to be focusing on locally available carbon sequestering materials. And we're blessed to be in the land of woods and well-managed forests, or forests that could be always better managed, but that we have that wood resource here as an industry.
Excellent. One other question here. What would be the biggest challenge that you see coming in the next few years in what we're doing globally in terms of sustainability, but more specifically within our industry, within the architecture world? What is our biggest challenge?
One of the challenges that we consistently see, and Jennifer and I there's a dividing line between us here and between our work in the office as well. Even though we're in one open office, we work on entirely different projects. So Jennifer manages the design work within Solitaire. and I manage consulting projects. So I do a lot of lead consulting or sustainability consulting to other firms. And one of the things that we consistently see a challenge with is essentially budget. A lot of federal projects, provincial projects have a capital budget they need to adhere to that totally dismisses the operating budget. So regardless of initiatives that you suggest or measures that you can propose that make sense on a 10-year basis or 15-year basis or 20-year or even a 5-year basis, if it's outside of the capital budget, it gets disregarded. So that's one of the challenges is to really assess true life cycle costing. And the other thing that we're seeing that's fairly new in how we're accounting for this is starting to account for the carbon footprint. So what is the cost of carbon? So not just an energy cost, but now a carbon cost. So whether we call that $50 a year as the federal government started with, which is then going to become 70 and 150 and eventually $300 per ton, allowing for that carbon cost, which does have the carbon we know has a real environmental impact and environmental cost, allowing that to inform our design decisions and our capital budgets as well is probably one of our biggest challenges.
I just add to that. I feel a little bit blessed on my side of the dashed line that I have lesser challenge because, as I mentioned, our clients come to us with these high aspiring goals on the net zero front, both energy and carbon. Ours is, oh man, that train of thought was just here. Oh, I know, education. How often do we all face, a client coming sometimes in the door saying, "I want to be off grid," and yes, or thinking that off grid is the way to our most efficient building, and we know that we can get past that point to be a net positive producer with a high performance building. So it's that education piece which we are seeing is as important to take the time to go through the reasons why we take the steps we do, and getting involved in the school system is one way as well. 10 years ago, the off-grid was ground source heat pumps. That was it. That was the terminology of the day, or the thing of the day, that everyone wanted a ground source heat pump, when we were seeing that the air source heat pumps were a much higher performance. It's just kind of dealing with that magazine glossy side of green that can be damaging ultimately in big picture. So it's making sure we've got the right terminology and the appropriate scale of project to help guide our clients through. That would be mine.
Yeah. I had a very circular argument with somebody once when we were talking about envelope versus systems, and their argument was, why would I put all that money in the envelope when I could just put in a ground source heat pump and get the same energy performance? My argument is, why would you invest in that technology when you just put it into a passive system and get the same energy performance? It's going to last the life of the building. Anyway, we never did finish that conversation because it was just each of us batting the ball back and forth.
I think probably many have we just say it's the most not exciting thing to do is to spend money on insulation. It from one point of view, you never see it. It doesn't give you any love back. You don't get any joy looking at it because you never see it. But it's that thing that is all important from that assembly point of view. So it's how to encourage those dollars to be spent in the best way.
A recent question that's just come up. What would your view, or maybe you're aware of this, of low carbon concrete or carbon curing manufacturing technology that introduces recycled CO2 into concrete to reduce carbon footprint without really compromising any performance? Not sure if you're aware of those technologies.
We are blessed to have Carbon Cure and the founders of Carbon Cure here in Halifax. And in fact, one of Carbon Cure's crew has joined us at Solterra, so we have inside track to a lot of what Carbon Cure is up to and how they are at the world scale conversations with the Bill Gates of the world, looking at this technology to really work on the carbon emissions challenge.
I don't know if it's a great idea. So one of the great things about carbon cure, or the way they sequester it, is it mineralizes it to permanently sequester it. So that CO2 is never going to be released again, as opposed to wood, which at some point in its end of life, it is going to release CO2 back into the atmosphere. So mineralization permanently sequesters it, which is great. I don't know that we should rely on it as a cure-all. So for instance, I think we should be looking at minimizing the amount of concrete, getting better concrete. And there might be other alternatives, but it's good. But I think it's one of many things that we should be taking into consideration in our carbon footprint.
Excellent. I want to sort of close this out and ask, sort of general closing comments that you could present to our listeners, our watchers, for this particular Architecture Day episode, year 2 in COVID. Next time we'll do this in person. But I mean, if you have any more things to express in terms, and you started to allude to it, but certainly it is what architecture and the architecture profession can bring to this understanding of how we can deal with the greenhouse gas issue that we now face, how it's a broad-based approach to dealing with the issue that employs all sorts of different specialists and consultants, and how that sort of broad-based idea allows for a great value added into the final built product that we see all around us, and is really, I would say, an integral part of our next steps to working towards a carbon-free world. Any comments there?
I would suggest that the architecture profession is well placed to try to address this, and to deal with it as a design problem, not a technology problem, though it's all sort of interrelated. So going back to the ancient tradition of architects being master builder, I think we need to kind of take that role again, that we started with fundamentals, and design is a key part of the environmental footprint. And minimizing design, making a smaller house, is one of the first, biggest, and best steps that we can make. And then really sort of inform yourselves and take control over the entire process. So be informed about what the mechanical decisions are and the lighting decisions are, and how daylight affects the energy.
For attending, and we will see you